All right, Bill, so let's get started. First, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
So, Bill, what were your first impressions of Myron when you first met him?
Well, when I first met him, I was a disc jockey at WTAE Radio, and they had hired Myron to do morning sports commentaries. And so I got to know him. I'd operated the board for Steelers games, for his commentaries, sometimes for his nightly talk show. So I got to meet him in 1969, and lo and behold, little did I know that at some point he and I would share the booth together for not only 11 years with the Steelers, but people forget that he and I had a year with Pitt in 1983 when he subbed for Johnny Sauer, who developed a heart problem and the doctor wouldn't clear him. And so I had that premonition, can I put it that way? I had that pre-learning experience that served me well when he and I shared the Steelers booth.
Yeah, actually, a lot of people do not know about that when you did Pitt together. How was that transition for him going from the pros back to college?
It was seamless. You know, Myron, he got it. He got the picture. He understood it was a different brand of football. He also understood it involved more people than the pros. And, you know, it was seamless. He just jumped right in and did a terrific job. And, well, first of all, he knows the game. And that was, I think, his calling card. But unlike many color men and women, he had those funny glasses. He sees the world funny. And that, to me, was what separates him from all the other people who ever tried to do analysis.
Do you have a favorite anecdote about Myron?
There are so many. On the air, gosh, I'm just trying to think of one that jumps out. Off the air, there were so many. I remember the time that, I do, because Super Bowl 43, Myron was not there. He was gone. And Ben took the team down the field after Larry Fitzgerald's touchdown. Every pass he threw was on a Steelers receiver's hands, and he probably should have gotten a touchdown with Santonio in the left side of the end zone. He got it in the right side. But anyhow, Steelers win. Later that summer, a priest friend of mine retired up in Clymer, PA, and I went to the reception after the Mass and everything, and it wasn't my cup of tea, so I went to the parish house for a couple of adult beverages, and I'm sitting on the back porch, and this woman comes between the houses. She said, "Bill Hillgrove, exactly the person I'm looking for." I said, "Why would that be?" She said, "Well, you know, when the Steelers fell behind the Cardinals in Super Bowl 43, and we were silent. We didn't know what to do. We had the terrible towel hung over the TV set, and somebody said, we have to say a prayer. Who do we pray to?" And nobody had an answer except my 7-year-old grandson. He said, "Let's pray to Myron Cope." Well, the rest is history. And come to think of it, doesn't St. Myron have a nice ring to it? But, you know, that little anecdote involving Myron after he was gone is very special to me. But, in the booth, you had to be ready for whatever he'd go. I mean, he'd go in one direction, then another. But one thing about him, he always over-prepared. He'd come in with a stack of index cards about that thick and rarely go through half of them. And I said to him once, I said, "Myron, all that preparation, you don't even use it." He said, "Billy, you never know when you have a clunker. And when you have a clunker, we got to keep people interested in the fourth quarter. And the only way to do it is to lay some stuff on them." And, you know, I miss him every day. I do.
You know, Bill, there's no doubt in my mind that Myron was pushing Santonio to make sure he didn't go out of bounds when Ben threw him that touchdown in the corner of the end zone in Tampa.
There is no doubt about that. The ghost of Cope. And sometimes teams feel the wrath of it. Most recently, Mike Vrabel's team, the Tennessee Titans, they stamped on the Steeler logo, and I know the ghost of Cope was there saying, and it came around and bit them. Not only did they lose to the Steelers, but they also lost in the playoffs, even though they were the higher seeded team. But you know, Cope can get you if you debase the towel, debase the Steeler insignia. Cope is there watching and making sure. And I also have seen this thing that's hit the internet where it says the ghost of Cope will come haunt you if you root for the Bengals. But, you know, I'm going to root for the Bengals in the Super Bowl. They represent the AFC North. Okay, it's their turn to try to win the big prize, but, you know, Cope, his presence, and, you know, the terrible towel. He's the only person that could ever have pulled that off. Nobody in our business, I don't care big, small, how much influence they had, they couldn't have done what Cope did to make that towel a living, breathing, eternal symbol of Steeler fandom.
What were your first impressions of this little guy, Bill, when Myron first introduced him?
Well, I remember the boss came to him and said, we need a gimmick to tie, you know, our station and the fans closer to the club. And Cope says, I'm not a gimmick guy. He said, your contract is up in January. He says, I'm all ears. And so they first came up with the boss's idea on something, and Cope said, that'll never work. He said, it's got to be something that people have. How about a towel? They could have a gold or a black towel, or a yellow or a black towel, and they could bring that to the game. And he wasn't sure it was going to work. Certainly the station wasn't sure, until Lynn Swann came out of the tunnel that fateful day in 1975, waving the terrible towel. And now, all these years later, the entire stadium waves the terrible towel. And what's noteworthy, on the road, Steeler fans are seen waving this terrible towel in stadiums that really should be exclusively the home teams, but Steeler fans are everywhere. And that's probably this and Myron Cope.
So, Bill, you mentioned that Myron was one of the best storytellers that you ever known. What made him that one-of-a-kind storyteller?
It was innate. It was inborn. He was born a storyteller and became a great writer. And I've seen him as his roommate on several occasions mull over just one word for 15 minutes, walking the floor. And I once said, Myron, how important is that word? He says, I'll tell you how important that word is. He said, the difference between light and lightning, they're basically the same root, but they mean oh so much of a different thing. So, you know, he was that professional about his approach to writing, and he took the same work ethic into the booth, and that's what made him successful. He worked and worked and worked and always made sure it was the right word, the right thing to say. And Lord knows he was inventive. He'd invent words. And, you know, nicknames like the Baltimore Birdies and the Cincinnati Bungles and the Cleve Brownies. You know, I mean, the Wash, he called them the Wash Dirty Skins. Then when they were supposed to win the Super Bowl one year, and they ended up 8-8, he called them the Wash Red Faces. And I guess Daniel Snyder had one of his minions come into the booth and say, cease and desist. Don't call us the Red Faces anymore. Well, then Cope just laid it on thick, the rest of the broadcast. I mean, it was brutal. And that's the way he was wired. That's the way he was built. And don't you dare cross him.
Wow, no doubt you cross Myron Cope. So we are having a impersonation contest at the Myron Cope event. Now, you have done it a few times already here, but have you tried to perfect it as much as you can?
Well, one of my favorite stories involves something personal. He and I and my brother played golf up at Conneaut Lake one day, and we gather at my place to have a couple of beverages afterwards, and Myron is telling stories, and I'll pick it up with his voice. So I'm in the midst of one of my best stories, and I turn around and discover that I am talking to myself. Both Hillgrove brothers are fast asleep. And, you know, I love to imitate him. Never did it to his face. He didn't appreciate it. Even these contests, he wasn't so sure about them. But I miss him every day, and Lord knows it was a great experience just being around him and becoming a friend.
Why do you think he was always a little bit, I guess, leery about those contests?
Well, I think we all have egos. Some of us suppress them better than others. And you know, I think he didn't like to be imitated. That, to him, was not a sincere form of flattery. But, you know, I think if he could step back and take a look at it, he'd be very, very satisfied and grateful. But at the moment, his ego just kind of got in the way.
Do you have a favorite moment with Myron at Conneaut? Now, I know you just mentioned that one before. Are there any other memories at Conneaut that stand out to you?
One night, it was in August, there was a harvest moon. He and I, my wife, 2 other people are on the boat having a great time. It's probably after 10 p.m. And I have a great sound system on my boat, and I had it turned up pretty loud. And there is Cope conducting the Count Basie Orchestra, silhouetted in this harvest moon on the front of my boat. But this is before cell phones, so I didn't have a camera handy to capture that moment, and it's one of my true regrets. But it was a magical moment. Just picture Cope with the sound turned all the way up, conducting the Count Basie Orchestra. It was priceless.
Now, I know this is a very broad question, Bill, but do you have a favorite moment with Myron in the broadcast booth?
Yes, I do. Having won, no, wait a minute. The Super Bowl that I worked with him was 2005. We lost that one. So I can't really use that as an example. It would almost have to be beating the Cleveland Browns in the playoff game when they desecrated the towel. And the towel and Cope got even with the Browns. And the satisfaction that he drew from that moment was very, very unforgettable.
Do you remember what he said when the Browns did that?
On the air or off? Because off the air, he might have said something that would cross the line. But on the air, he was always very professional about that, even though he'd sometimes lose control of himself and his emotions, as only he could do. And yeah, I remember he took particular pleasure in seeing the Browns go down after desecrating the terrible towel.
And finally, Bill, one more question. So what do you want the world to remember about Myron Cope?
The world should remember that Myron Cope was a Pittsburgh guy. Myron knew this market. He knew the people in the market. I believe we are a unique market in that regard. We're a big little town, maybe the biggest little town in North America. He had that feeling for the people of this town and their blue-collar ethic, their approach to physicality. Defense is important. And Myron just was able to grab that and bottle it. And nobody will ever approximate what he did relating this market to the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Bill, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.